And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to GeekWatch, a subsidiary of the Monastery, the open bar of the internet. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me, as always, is my good brother here in the temple, the man of 1,000 runes, the CEO of Zadare Enterprises, and the bane of my fucking existence, good brother Xanatrix.
He tried to bane me earlier, but all that ended up happening was me baning myself.
All because you thought an airsoft gun was a legit one, even though even as airsoft it's still cursed.
I thought it was legit at first because most airsoft guns are modeled pretty well these days, and then I remembered neither of those guns uses electrical actuation.
I still wouldn't fire that thing I shared with you because that thing looks like it's going to explode on a slight breeze.
Well, you're not wrong.
I rarely am, but people always seem surprised about that.
I'm not. Because I'm usually not wrong either.
But it's been quite a while since we tackled something video related, and this is one that I've had in the back pocket. We recorded in the recording days, and then my system decided to act like it did back then.
Mm-hmm.
And we lost the original footage. And I was so pissed off with everything that happened that I was in absolutely no mood to try and redo it. So I've been sitting on this particular one for months.
Exactly.
But Obsidian is an interesting beast when it comes to role-playing games. Now, I think a lot of people will the furthest memory they'll have of them is Knights of the Old Republic 2, which, although there's some really strong characterizations, and Kreia is probably one of the best villains, I guess, that Star Wars has ever had.
Mm-hmm.
There is also the fact that the game was rushed to all hell, and the only reason it's tolerable nowadays is because people have modded the hell out of it.
To be fair, that does not fall on Obsidian.
No,
that falls firmly on BioWare.
Because they were expecting a full-fledged RPG at the same level of Knights of the
KOTOR
Old
1.
Knights of the Old Republic in, what was it, 14 months?
14 to 16 months, yes. And let's also be doubly fair. Obsidian appreciates and has shown their appreciation to the modding community that fixed it up and even brought in old, dummied out stuff.
Mm-hmm. Of course, karma would end up meeting BioWare a few years later, given what happened with Dragon Age 2.
Mm-hmm. Now, on top of that, karma would go even further when Obsidian made The Outer Worlds.
Mm-hmm.
Which, also, let's not forget that much like with KOTOR 2, Obsidian also made Fallout New Vegas.
Yeah, which
had the same issues as KOTOR 2. It was rushed again, this time by Bethesda. No surprise.
It rushed, but the sheer quality of the writing in the world that they were allowed to make is what's allowed New Vegas to withstand a lot of those problems. And
of course, the modding community for Bethesda has always been extremely robust, and as such, that game got modded nearly immediately.
Mm-hmm. And I would bring up Neverwinter Nights 2, but for whatever reason, Neverwinter Nights both 1 and 2 just didn't do it for me. I can't really explain why. I did consider giving them a second chance, especially when someone modded Tome of Battle classes into the game.
Mm-hmm.
But I get the feeling it wouldn't have been all that impressive.
Mm-hmm.
What I do, but the thing for me is that Obsidian has always been very good at as writers, and that's so. Before we can even get into Alpha Protocol, we need to mention one particular project that they were working on that never came to be. And I'm not talking about the aliens thing. I'll get to that in a minute. I'm talking
Oh,
about the dwarfs project that they were working with Disney before Disney decided to yeet out of the game development business the way they had been,
yeah.
which that and the whole thing with Infinity is a story for another day. And I'd rather have somebody who has firsthand knowledge about Infinity to comment on that.
Yeah, I didn't do anything with Infinity, so I can't even.
Well, I'm saying that I'd only want to cover Infinity if I can bring a certain friend of ours on,
Oh yeah.
and he's too busy with his own projects.
Yep.
But the the thing with a lot of Obsidian stuff is you look at their history and you'll see a lot of cases of screwed over by somebody higher up on the food chain, asking them to make chicken salad out of chicken shit in the time it takes to microwave a dish. That is a little bit hyperbolic, obviously, but it's not too far from the truth.
Hmm.
Like, a lot of their stuff ends up getting rushed because somebody demanded an immediate result. Now this is where a certain blue hedgehog enters the picture, because in the in the early days of the seventh generation, because of the moves that had been made both with the Xbox and the moves expected with the Xbox 360, the early years of that were in this weird period where a lot of the things that would become ubiquitous with the seventh generation hadn't taken their foothold yet, and a lot of people still had the mindset of game design in the sixth. So big companies putting money in what could be considered more niche titles wasn't wasn't all that far fetched. Let's also not forget that Microsoft was trying really really hard to expand into Japan. The big example of this was the handful of RPGs that they spearheaded. Um, Two of them being Lost Odyssey and Infinite Undiscovery. I think there was a third one, but I can't recall the name at the moment.
I can't either.
I think one of the third one. I want to say Star Ocean: The Last Hope, but I think that came out a bit after this.
Yeah, I think that's too late.
And it's not. And those two weren't launch titles, but they were early 360 exclusives with big damn pedigrees because well, Lost Odyssey was developed by Mistwalker, which is Sakaguchi's company, and I think Infinite Undiscovery was done by Triace. Oh wait, I know what was the other one that was supposed to be the big foray in for that Microsoft was spearheading. Tales of Vesperia.
Hmm.
Now none of these were launch titles, but they were meant to be killer apps for for Microsoft's foray into Japan.
Yes.
And unsurprisingly, when a newcomer goes into a brand new territory, whether it be in wrestling or otherwise, it did not work.
Oh,
It
not
was
if you think it's going to be a killer app.
It wasn't from a lack of trying, but it was more of the fact that they thought they could just roll in as the big swinging dick and not understand how to read the room properly.
Yeah.
If anything, it falls into the same trap that the XFL did. I should say the first incarnation of the XFL, where Vince wanted to do football, despite the fact that he knew nothing about football culture.
Hmm.
I mean, for God's sake, he said that his favorite football player was Wahoo McDaniel, who only ever played college football and only in Texas.
Ah. There's no punchline. I was like, ah.
But apparently that push gave other companies ideas, and this is where I bring it back to Sega. Because this is where Sega decided we're going to try and do an expansion into the West more aggressively. Probably because of the fact that their stuff with Sonic and some of their other stuff had mixed results, and the idea of just becoming a game developer was not panning out. In fact, they almost went bankrupt.
Hmm.
Now, one part of the Western expansion was their teaming up with Creative Assembly, and they end up being the primary publisher for that for their future works. I think the first one under that partnership was Shogun 2.
Might have been.
Don't quote me on that though. And of course they would also get the whole thing with the best Alien game in the last 20 years.
Hmm.
But one of the other things was they really wanted an RPG in their portfolio. They didn't care what genre it is. They didn't care what gameplay style. They wanted a role-playing game in their portfolio.
Yes.
It could be argued that this was envy due to the success of Mass Effect, but I can't say that for certain. In lieu of that, I'll only say if it was envy based on what was happening with stuff like Mass Effect and even stuff like Persona and on the PS2. If that was the case, I would only nod and say everything makes sense. But Obsidian saw this as an opportunity to do the spy fiction RPG, which you would think would be a very and JT saying Mass Effect was not successful. I don't know. As far as the original Mass Effect, I don't know. It was successful enough to get EA's attention.
The original Mass Effect, the video game?
Yeah.
I don't know why it wouldn't be seen as successful.
Now, was it as successful as two and JT is saying part 2 was successful. You're not wrong, but you're not looking at the bigger picture here. The first one was successful to a point. Now, if you're talking the massive millions of copies numbers, like some Call of Duty numbers thing, no.
It went for 1.6 million copies in 6 weeks from release.
Mm-hmm.
And it got a 91 on Metacritic.
Now,
from the aggregate scores.
Yeah.
To say it's not successful is not true. It was absolutely successful.
Then you're saying it had a cult following which brought attention to EA. No.
1.6 million copies is not a cult following. And that's 1.6 million copies in 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. For a small studio that BioWare still was at the time. No. Mass Effect was successful, extremely successful
Mm-hmm.
for what it was. It was not a AAA game. Everybody forgets that.
This is the reason why it's important to not act in binaries when assessing these kind of things. It's
Mm-hmm.
best to assess these things in a spectrum.
Mm-hmm. And as of sales numbers in April 2011, which is, I believe 2011 is when ME2 released, Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 2 combined had sold more than 7 million units worldwide.
Yeah.
So again, Mass Effect 1 was not a AAA game when it was released. Mass Effect 2 could technically be considered a AAA game, and it definitely had that sort of polish to it. And Mass Effect 3 was, of course, a AAA game with a terrible ending. We don't
Which
talk
we've
about that
already
one.
talked about.
Yeah.
But the point, it's important. It's important to keep in mind that the late 2000s and early 2010s were very much a transition, and the concept of a AAA game wasn't what we think of the concept of a AAA game now.
Yeah. Remember that Mass Effect 1 released in 2007. 2007, where 1 million copies for a small studio was a goddamn explosion. That's huge for them.
Mm-hmm.
That would be equivalent to, an EA game in 2007 getting 20 or 40 million copies, because God knows they need that many copies with how much people hate them. But Mass Effect 1.
Well, let's also not forget that all of that was on one SKU.
Yes. It was really the fact that Mass Effect 1 got that particular following as BioWare, because BioWare's following prior to that, even with Knights of the Old Republic, those really were cult classics. Knights of the Old Republic being the most popular of the cult classics, sure.
And Jade Empire is the picture example of a cult classic.
Exactly. These BioWare was tiny. The only people who knew it were people who were already devoted to their game,
and or already inundated in the computer role playing gaming scene, and in particular the PC end of that, which up until I'd say up until the early 2010s was significantly isolated from the console gaming scenes.
Mm-hmm. Whereas Mass Effect was initially an Xbox 360 only game. It didn't go to PC for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
And it did gangbusters for an unknown studio. Let's be honest here. In 2007, BioWare was still a by word of mouth type studio. People who knew it because of word of mouth and being fans of that particular niche. Mm-hmm. Fox News saved Mass Effect. You might be a little bit right about that one. The whole, oh god, it's a alien sex simulator thing definitely gave it some publicity it probably didn't have before.
Saying that it saved it is a bit of a I'd say is a bit of an overstatement. It just pushed things along. But getting back onto the rails.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one might think that trying to pitch a spy fiction RPG would prompt the natural question of how did Sega even agree to this? Let's consider the fact that in the late 2000s, we were in a boom period when it came to spy fiction.
Yep.
24, Alias, the revival of James Bond,
the Bourne series,
mm-hmm, as well as the Bourne series, as well as the steady explosion that was going on with Tom Clancy's work. And hey there, JT.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Hello, hello.
Hey, Zan, long time no see.
I was just talking about you before the show, actually.
No kidding.
No kidding.
So this is definitely a case of speak the devil's name and he shall appear.
All things considered, very true.
The handsome devil will oblige.
Yeah. I had gone into just before you had hopped in. I was going into answering the question of why something like a spy fiction RPG would even be a pitch that would get picked up, and consider that in the late 2000s we were kind of in a spy boom, almost an obsession.
Mm-hmm.
I had brought up 24, I had brought up Alias, we had brought up the Bourne movies, as well as the Daniel Craig era for James Bond, which I do want to revisit discussing that era sometime down the road. But this was, and even with that, there was stuff like the Tom Clancy games, especially the Rainbow Six games,
Correct.
and and even some more old school inspired stuff like No One Lives Forever. As an aside, may Raven and Monolith be relieved from the hell that they're in. But the fact is that this was the biggest position that spy fiction was in since the 1970s.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Considering that as we got into the 80s and 90s, the only real spy fiction being pushed at that point was Bond movies.
Mm-hmm. And again, we'll probably talk about it down the road one of these days, but the 80s were not exactly the kindest time to James Bond.
No, they were not.
The 80s, I mean, at least we got, Dalton and Moore as Bonds out of them, but Lazenby got kind of stooped on that one.
I don't blame the actors for that. I rarely blame the actors. More often than not, I will always blame the writer or the director.
Man, but they were so British, but in the good way. Like, it was just that type of British where you go, God damn, I wish I could talk like that.
So would you?
I love Roger Moore and Timothy Dalton. They did great Bond.
Yeah, they did great. They did great Bond. It's just they probably had back problems from carrying the movie themselves.
Roger Moore was my father's Bond. That's the one he grew.
But I think probably time to come back onto the rails with this focus on the spy craze. Creating a spy RPG was not out of the question since other spy games or spy adjacent games were taking place.
Mm-hmm. But the thing is, they didn't even write a full-on pitch deck. Like, normally when you're pitching something, you're writing a full-on deck that's like a 20-slide presentation, or a small zine-like book.
Yeah, it should be something that takes like 5 minutes at most to present.
Instead, what was presented was a idea that was only a page long that was focused on one set piece. And that was enough for Sega to give the green light. And not only give them a green light, but give them a 2-year development contract.
They sold a 2-year development cycle for a spy RPG on a single page. Nice.
On one hand, nice. On the other hand, this was probably the first mistake.
Probably. I mean, they should have had a more concrete idea of what the full game was going to be. But the fact that they had a very unique core ideal that they wanted to... Because that set piece is clearly what they distilled the ideal that they wanted to achieve down to. Mm-hmm. But you definitely need to do just more than the central ideal of your game.
There was also the fact that they wanted to keep everybody employed after the Dwarves project went up in flames.
Wars. Jesus.
Yeah. JT, if you didn't know it, at one point, Obsidian was contracted to work on a video game all about that focused on the Seven Dwarfs.
It was a sequel to the original Snow White video game.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
It never.
It
came
got
to fruition.
canceled.
Maybe for the best.
Maybe if it was like a battle royale, Seven Dwarfs Smackdown or something like that. Well, that could be interesting.
No. You want to know what it should have been?
What?
You ever played the Lost Vikings?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
That could work.
That would have worked a little too well, I think.
Exactly. Oh. But the reason why I say this is a problem is an idea and just that set piece. The problem is, even within something like spy fiction, there's a lot of different ways you can go. I've often used a description that it's think of two extremes on a scale. On one end, you have Jason Bourne.
Mm-hmm.
That hyper grounded, trying to be hyper realistic approach. On the other end, you have James Bond. Very
Gadgets and
fantastical,
gizmos aplenty.
gadgetry, gizmos, over the top villains, very comic book.
Would you say it was gadgets and gizmos aplenty, who's its and what's its galore?
I am not acknowledging that.
See, this is the slow payback you get for that airsoft monstrosity, Monk.
You were the one who fucked up, not me.
I acknowledge my fuck up of thinking it was a real gun, but the fact that somebody put a P90 on a fucking MP5, even as a goddamn airsoft gun, this you are the one who showed me. This is on you.
This breaks the Zan.
Break is a harsh word. More like frustrates, and if we're using Monk's terms. We're using Monk's terms. It's a grudging.
Oi.
But the reason why but because of the fact that you have that wide of a net, if someone was to say that they're doing a spy fiction game, and they can't answer where in that spectrum they're trying to land, that is a problem. And from what I've heard, plenty of Obsidian employees have looked at Alpha Protocol as a learning experience of, we need to nail down exactly what the hell we're doing before we start doing it.
Well, Monk, no, they had an answer. On a scale of James Bond to Jason Bourne, where are you? Obsidian's answer was yes. Because remember that both the three combat styles or approaches to missions or whatever you want to call them are supposed to be based off of that spectrum. And then, of course, the three dialogue stances are explicitly supposed to be Jack Bauer, James Bond, and Jason Bourne. Also, what's with spies starting with J names all the time?
Good point.
Even in something like Men in Black, you have Agent J.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, this makes Spy Family very, 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 very refreshing, because the agent's name is Twilight, or Tasogare if you want to go with the Japanese, and his cover name is Lloyd. Lloyd Forger. Why nobody understands that he's a spy with that fucking last name, I don't know.
Then again, how many times in comic books have we seen civilian identities names that so blatantly foreshadow their hero or villain name?
I plead the fifth.
2 words: Harleen Quinzel.
I'm not touching that one, because that one is a backronym. It's a back row identity, essentially. It came from Harley Quinn, and then they're just like, oh yeah, by the way, she used to be a psychologist at Arkham Asylum that was interviewing and trying to help the Joker, who then perverted her.
But point is,
Hi, I'm Dave. Hi, I'm Dave. Not villain. I am totally not, and I am totally not a villain.
Essentially.
but the point is that trying to do all of that at once, I treat that with the same degree of reverence that I treat the world's most ubiquitous role-playing game can be used to play all kinds of fantasy.
I understand. I think that it still could have been achieved if each stance, whether you're, gadgets and gizmo spy James Bond, whether you're rough and tumble investigator Jack Bauer, or whether you're secret sleeper cell assassin Jason Bourne, we're all also tied to each approach. And we'll get more into approaches, and I'll give you my impressions of which ones should go to whom. One of them is very obviously James Bond, but the other two could go either way, and I'll give you my rationales when we go into that later. But if you tied the personality and stance to that approach, then you could have had each distinct type of spy, and you could have had 3 completely different, very unique playthroughs.
Mm-hmm. Now, even with all of that, the big thing that I'm trying to get down is the fact that the amount of approaches when you have that kind of a broad net, that creates its own issues because of the particulars of each of those angles. But even more so, stealth action is one of the hardest games to develop, one of the hardest game genres to develop and program for.
As Kojima Studios will tell you.
Yes, indeed.
Not only Kojima Studios would tell you that, but also Looking Glass would tell you that.
Oh, Jesus, that's a name I haven't heard in forever.
Especially given how much of that game is going to have to rely on the AI.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying the AI in the Thief games was great. They have their dirt moments as well, and that the same goes with any of the AI work in a Metal Gear Solid game or in a Splinter Cell game. Although I know some people would rage at it, but I think history is looked on more fondly towards Metal Gear Solid than it has for Splinter Cell, the game that everybody kept telling me had better stealth.
Mm-hmm.
Splinter Cell had really good stealth for what it was trying to do. I wouldn't say it's better, but different. The problem was that the type of stealth Splinter Cell was going for was much more stealthy stealth than the type of stealth that Metal Gear Solid had been, which was stealth, but not really.
In parentheses, stealth in parentheses.
Well, the big difference is Solid Snake can go out into an open fight. That is something you can do as Solid Snake. Sam Fisher cannot. You get into an open firefight, you've lost that mission. You will die unless you are very, very good at remaneuvering everybody, or unless that was your plan all along to lure them into traps.
Absolutely.
Either way, if you are not being as stealthy as possible when taking out targets, when getting around obstacles as Sam Fisher, you're very likely to fail a mission just by being killed. And with our comparison back to Thief, that kind of follows.
Thief 2.
Monk, what do we think about Thief 2?
I like Thief 2.
Thieves Guild.
But a problem that I have with it is the story. The story is far more invasive.
Thieves Guild.
Yeah. I'm not.
We've talked about that particular one before.
Mm-hmm.
But the so the big thing here is that the reason Metal Gear Solid is looked upon so kindly, in my opinion, is you have an out if stealth fails you or you're just not that good at it. You have that out of, I can go into open combat if and I still have to be careful. I can't just stand in the path of 3 guys shooting at me. Need to take cover and all that. But the failure point isn't nearly as high, unless of course you're playing on a difficulty like European Extreme that says spotted once, game over. But that's a difficulty you select. So going into it, that's what you're getting. I'd also like to point out that a lot of games today that allegedly are stealth action are much more action than stealth.
That's
correct.
That's something else. And I'm not being hardcore stealth or being hardcore action. There's nothing wrong with that. But the reason I bring up how difficult doing stealth action is, and I can only imagine how much of a nightmare it is for the programming team, is the fact that, for one, Obsidian had never done anything with stealth before.
True.
2, they were working on a brand new engine. They were working on the recently released Unreal Engine 3, which, when people talk about the ubiquitousness of the Unreal Engine, that's largely Unreal Engine 4 that they're talking about.
Yeah, Unreal Engine 4 is where Unreal Engine really exploded. And I will give credit where credit is due. As much as I hate Epic Games for a lot of the bullshit they pull as a company, Unreal Engine 4 and 5 are fucking fantastic. They are a godsend compared to Unity.
Mm-hmm.
Licensing fees are licensing fees, but that's going to be the case with any good engine.
Yeah. I mean, there is the issue of licensing fees, but there's also the issue of there were some frame rate issues. There are always some frame rate issues with Unreal Engine 3.
Yeah, three was that transitory state. Because technically Unreal Engine 1, which started with Unreal,
yeah,
and Unreal Engine 2 were very stable, but they were also basically pre-2000s in the way they executed things. I mean, Unreal Engine 1 absolutely was pre-2000s, but they were very stable. Unreal Engine 3, I think, the reason for its hiccups was it was that transitory period again, especially in that part of the 2000s, between what had come before and what needed to come after.
Mm-hmm. But this is a 1-2 punch to why they may have bitten off more than they could chew. And let's not forget that this was one of 2 projects that Obsidian was working on in the early days of development.
Yeah. The other one was New Vegas.
No, not New Vegas. Alien Crucible.
That one too. The only reason I say New Vegas is because New Vegas and Alpha Protocol released the same year.
Yeah, but Alien Crucible and Alpha Protocol were the 2 that they were working on under contract with Sega.
Mm-hmm.
And the amount of delays and the amount of just the amount of headaches that were being caused because of how much time they spent. They spent over a year on one set piece. To put things in perspective, it's plenty of games have spent a lot of money working on a particular set piece. Obsidian was spending a lot of resources on certain set pieces with not enough to show for it. And I remember one of the employees stating that at that point I think Sega was just fed up because they knew that one of the games was going to get the axe. They just didn't know which one.
Mm-hmm.
The reasoning that they chose to axe the Aliens RPG that they were working on, their mindset was, we have another studio working on an Aliens game in a much bigger genre. If you know your history, you know exactly what game I'm talking about, and all I have to say to that is, hello, Randy.
All I have to say to that is, why did you add an A to the word tether?
Yeah.
One letter, and you fucked everything. Good job. This is a friendly reminder from a hobbyist programmer that one letter, one diacritical mark, one piece of punctuation, and your code goes tits up. Have a nice day.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason I'm a hobbyist programmer, and it is not my job, because fuck that shit.
I've already told you that I bribe the programmers with sandwiches just in case one of them goes crazy.
Yep, it's going to be just like that scene from Billy Madison when he apologizes to that kid he bullied.
Mm-hmm.
You'll be crossed off the list because you were a good guy.
Mm-hmm.
Or that routine from Dane Cook when that guy finally goes postal. He's like, "Thanks for the candy."
Yep. But, and to be fair, I can understand why some people say that Alpha Protocol should have been the one that was canceled, but I do kind of wonder how Crucible would have turned out. Would it have been any better? I can't imagine it being any worse than what we got in this timeline.
I think it would have been better solely from the fact that the aliens actually would have fought.
True. But the results there were some other problems. Chief among them, they actually were considering killing off one of the hub worlds, so it would be opening 2 hubs and then ending, just to get the game out. Which seems blasphemous, but when you consider all of the branches that they had to account for, to the point that it doesn't feel like a branching path and more like a tumbleweed.
It feels, rather than feeling like a tree, it feels like the biological phylogenetic tree. And if any of you have ever seen a picture of the phylogenetic tree of life and evolution, you know what I'm fucking talking about.
Boy.
Mm-hmm. Like I said, the tree of life is more like a tumbleweed. But in addition to all of that, let's not forget, this was smack dab in the middle of that "your choices matter" narrative in game development, which I think the reason you don't see that being pitched as much is twofold. One, everything that happened after Mass Effect 3, and two, I think a lot of developers realize that the "your choices matter" kind of narrative creates more headaches than it is worth.
Can still be done well and executed right and make a really good game, but making it the sole like one of the bigger focuses, not necessary. It should be something that adds into the overall RPG.
Yeah.
Not to mention, I think they just hated being outclassed by an indie game made by a composer. Because, frankly, I'm going to be frank, and this is not me pandering to Shades, as he isn't here. But your choices matter has never been stronger than in Undertale.
I think it's because of the fact that that said choices are far more intrinsically linked to gameplay than just the difference of a cutscene.
Yes, and that's actually, if people are going to make more games where your choices do matter, that's actually the way it should be done. But that's another aside. Yes, this Alpha Protocol also had the whole choices matter thing.
The tagline was "Your weapon is choice."
I remember cringing at that tagline when I saw it.
Mm-hmm.
I remember being like, guys, you could have just said your weapon is anything else that has to do with being a spy, and you would have been fine. Like, your weapon is deception would have been cool.
Mm-hmm.
Your weapon is choice just makes it sound like, so I'm just choosing how I kill people? Gun? Poison? Electrocution? Okay.
Yeah. But this is where I want to get into one of the big problems with having Obsidian of all people handle this. I've already mentioned the whole thing of them not having a strong history when it comes to stealth action, and it definitely shows with how the AI is aggressively retarded. There is no better way for me to put it.
But this isn't like when a retard gets retard strength, guys. When we say aggressively retarded, we mean, well, they think a corner is beautiful and they need to lick the paint on it.
There's the only thing consistent about the AI is inconsistency.
Ah, the age-old oxymoron.
It still applies, so I'm going to keep using it.
Of course. It's a good oxymoron, too.
The big problem is the fact that in addition to that, it is far more, as Racevic had pointed out, it's far more RPG than espionage, because any way you slice it, you're still doing this as a power-based hero, the way you would in any of their other work.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point to point out that the powers are mixed into quote-unquote approaches or kits or whatever you want to call them.
Mm-hmm. You essentially have 3 approaches and thus 3 kits. That is essentially can be summed up in 3 pillars: combat, tech, and stealth.
And as for the way I, and apparently the wiki calls them, stealth, run and gun, and gadgets. And
the point is that for all intents and purposes, it's the warrior, rogue, mage trinity.
Yes, and then if we're going back to the whole, your dialogues are based off of Jack Bauer, James Bond, and Jason Bourne. Obviously, tech is your James Bond. I would say stealth is your Jason Bourne, because he was intended to be an assassin,
mm-hmm.
someone who snuck in, killed the target, was exfiltrated without ever being seen or accosted.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, run and gun definitely feels the closest to Jack Bauer, though not quite. Because Jack Bauer couldn't exactly run and gun being, a lawful, like an actual law enforcement individual. So,
mm-hmm.
But he was very much the most direct conflict of those 3.
Mm-hmm.
And you could choose to upgrade any and all of these particular you could upgrade the skills associated with any and all of these, stealth itself being a skill.
Mm-hmm.
But the gadgets were part of, I think it was sabotage and tech aptitude, and some gadgets were in one and some gadgets were in other, which is a pain in the ass. Luckily, both branches only cost 3 points per rank compared to stealth's 6 points per rank. It was, and you could really kind of screw yourself at times if you didn't know what skills applied where effectively. Especially, for example, martial arts as a skill.
Mm-hmm.
How many people actually would have upgraded this? Probably only people who were doing or trying to do the stealth route.
Especially since that's a skill that's going to depend on you being very close. And,
Yeah.
And if you're that level of close, that creates its own problems since you're going to be easier to detect.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, you had skills for the 4 types of weapons: the assault rifle, shotguns, submachine guns, and pistols,
which had their own weird powers as you develop them.
Yeah. And then you had the skill toughness, which was something you always wanted to be advancing because it was your "this is how you don't die" skill.
Aha.
This is your health, your defense, all of these things. And not upgrading toughness, while good for a challenge run, is not fun.
And if I'm being honest, just from a design perspective, I've never been fond of having this one ability that is so linked to a character's survivability. Whether it be toughness in something like toughness in this, the toughness feat in D20 based games, or even something like Ox body technique in Exalted. Having this one feature that is meant to be your survivability feature, it ends up being too useful and almost mandatory.
Mm-hmm.
And that creates a bit of a, I guess, a vacuum is the best way for me to put it.
Yeah. I would also say that even with this quote unquote 3-way approach, there were skills in each of there were things you got from each rank of a skill from some of these other paths that are useful in all paths. For example, just in stealth alone, getting to rank 2 gives you an active. Oh, that's a dumb thing too. I hated that. An active ability that gives you the ability to sense enemy placements and positions. And the reason I say that it's active is because it lasts for 60 seconds and has a cooldown of 45 that doesn't start until it's finished, instead of giving you a passive, which would have been much more useful. But that's just getting 2 ranks in stealth, and that's useful in all situations.
There's also the fact that with a lot of, let's consider the things that are pretty much a given in a stealth action game. Degrees of detection is one of them, whether it be the alert, caution, searching thing that you see in Metal Gear, or something, or even the key detection that you have in Tenchu.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is having some sort of short-range detection system. Usually, this is in the form of a radar. And of course, Tenchu once again had the whole thing of key, but even in ones that don't have a radar, you have plenty of what's referred to in game design as signposting.
Signposting, or the big hit that happened ever since the first Rocksteady Batman game, your investigation vision,
mm-hmm.
whatever it might be called, whether it's the focus in Horizon, whether it's Witcher vision in The Witcher, whether it's any of these other types of vision overlays, that is technically an active ability, and is technically got some downsides, at least in some games. I remember you could leave Bat Vision on at any time and do everything that Batman can do normally while it's on.
Mm-hmm.
Just makes things look kind of weird. But the the ability to see the enemy in some way before they can see you, whether it's through signposting or through these abilities like radars and visions, is necessary. And in Alpha Protocol, I'm pretty sure that detection ability was really the only way you could do it, and there wasn't good signposting.
There's that, and I think one of the more egregious issues was evasion, which essentially turned you invisible the first time you get detected, and has a cooldown of 300 seconds.
Yep, 5-minute cooldown.
And
I remember that thing. That thing was fucked.
The problem with these kind of things is because of how they're set up, you don't have the tools to be stealthy, and the way the camera works certainly doesn't help. And
don't remind me.
now I know it would be very tempting to bring up the mini games that you have to do in order to bypass security.
Yeah, but I'm gonna stop you there and go. Mass Effect did that too.
One they did, but the big problem was for me, and I think for a lot of people, was how lengthy those mini games could get, and even Obsidian didn't like them. The only reason that they were there was because Sega insisted on mini games.
Okay, so that one we can actually say not Obsidian's fault.
Mm-hmm. And the idea with mini games is the emphasis on mini. They should not last more than a minute.
Yeah, they shouldn't be. They should be unobtrusive and quick.
Just as a case in point, this is the reason why I liked Triple Triad and I did not like Tetramaster.
Yeah, we've had that discussion a few times now, Monk. But just to give it to everybody else, Triple Triad was something you could win quickly if you knew what you were doing, and also because you could literally manipulate the game by winning against the Queen of Cards and having her change the rules. It could be really easy to cheap it. Triple Triad was fantastic for that, and anyone who wants to insult Triple Triad has to go through me and the Monk. But with Tetramaster, not only was there no way to manipulate the rules, which I was really dissatisfied with, games were lengthy because the AI took forever to make moves sometimes, I swear.
They'd go like 2 to 5 minutes, whereas a Triple Triad match you can do in about 45 seconds at most.
Yeah, and on top of that, what was really bullshit was, look at the face values on your cards. No, those are not your values. There was RNG behind every card in the game to decide whether your values, even if they were higher than another card, whether your values were going to win. There was a chance for cards with the highest value to lose. And that's bullshit.
And the piece de resistance is the card tournament that's mandatory.
The card tournament where my first time through the game I had to restart 6 or 7 times because I was trying to get 100% of the cards for Tetramaster, and I wanted to do take over the whole board wins, because take over the whole board wins gave you all 5 cards from your opponent.
Mm-hmm. But taking that into account, I think one particular thing that was a bit of a mistake was utilizing the skill tree the way that they did of that Mass Effect 1 like approach.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not entirely sure if that fits this particular setup.
It really didn't.
Putting aside the fact that you had different skill point costs, which kind of defeats the purpose. There was also the fact that as much as streamlined is a dirty word, I really do feel like having weapons and martial arts be skills should not have been done. I think you should have been leveling packages instead of leveling individual skills.
With as many advancement points as you had to spend in some of them, absolutely.
To put
The lowest advancement point costs are technical and sabotage at 3 per rank.
If you want to know what would have been a better way to level things up if you had to use an RPG like level up system, look at Kingdoms of Amalur.
I'll even say one that's taboo for half the people in the monastery because of their personal issues. Look at Horizon Zero Dawn. 1 to 2 to 3 to 4.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I didn't have any problem with Horizon Zero Dawn. I had more of a problem with what I've been seeing out of Forbidden West.
I haven't seen anything, and I'm probably not going to because Zero Dawn was enough of that game series for me.
Mm-hmm. But the point is if they had done it where instead of leveling up and getting skill points to spend in this grid-like skill tree, if they had set it up where you have 3 different packages, stealth, tech, and combat, that you were leveling up, I think that would have made things a little bit more palpable and actually encourage people to experiment.
That would have been one thing.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing they could have done is tied in the toughness ability to just your levels. Don't have to spend anything in it. As you level up, you get more from it. Period.
Yeah, it already does the whole perk thing where your relationship with NPCs can grant you perks, which I'm completely on board for. I love the whole technique as a reward thing in Jade Empire, and this is just more of that.
Not to mention, it fits an espionage game.
Mm-hmm. But that's ignoring one of the bigger problems, and that is the fact that the visual effects don't really fit. This is where, not to mention they don't look good because of how muted the graphical setup is. But But when you're trying to have things that level of grounded, it kind of breaks that to have you turn red to indicate that your melee attacks are doing more damage.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that's easier to wrap your head around when you're doing a fantasy game or a science fiction game.
Yeah, instead of a modern or modern-esque fiction.
Yeah. And this is where being a power-based character kind of undermines that. The other thing that isn't as easy to wrap your head around with this is even the fact that you have cooldowns.
I hated that.
I'm perfectly fine with cooldowns in a lot of MMOs and a lot of CRPGs. Granted,
Yep.
I have issues when you have cooldown and MP cost, but that's a whole other topic.
True.
But because of that groundedness, it ends up creating problems, and this is where you have this whole thing of it's trying to be grounded, but everything keeps breaking to the point where it becomes hilarious even with these effects.
If it's so bad it's funny, at least there's a silver lining.
Yeah. However, all of what I've just said is operating under one asterisk: that you're playing the game on normal. In my professional opinion, no one should ever play this on hard. And we are no stranger to hard games here on both GeekWatch and on the Monastery.
Elden Ring is fun, and I love the shit out of it, and I've already beaten it a few times.
See,
yes,
Elden, not just that, but also the fact that at least one of us has suffered through a Mario ROM hack, specifically a Kaizo ROM hack.
Only one on.
I said at least one.
True. I was a bit of a masochist when I was younger.
Oh. And you remember when you shared me that video that you titled "I Want to Be the Mario," JT.
Was that?
Years ago, you had shared one instance of it that you in an email you titled "I Want to Be the Mario."
Dude, I don't even remember that. You got a memory like an elephant, man. I'm a little more selective.
Yeah. Point is, it was I think it was it was that time when Proton John, Psychedelic Eyeball, and Wooga decided to play through Kaizo Mario.
Oh my.
And John ended up going through one of these special levels, which is where we got the line "Stop catching death."
Eh. Of course, Kaizo Mario is also extremely popular for the now dead meme "Move Faster" Pokey.
Mm-hmm. But the point is, we're no stranger to difficult games. But at the same time, we have discussed at length that there is a fine line between difficult and bullshit. And the fact that in a lot of cases, difficulty is the main thing that changes is the amount of health and damage, the amount of health you have, the amount of damage you can inflict, and vice versa for the enemy.
A perfect example of this is the escalating difficulties of Devil May Cry, where you get to keep your health and damage where they always were, but the enemies get more health, more damage, and eventually they can all double trigger too.
Or you could go even worse by having it that either A, everybody dies in one hit, or B, only you die in one hit.
Heaven and Hell, everybody including you dies in one hit. Hell or Hell, Dante Must Die difficulty, where all enemies have double health, double damage, and can all double trigger, and you still die in one hit. Hell or Hell is the difficulty that I imagine that most true stylers played on.
Mm-hmm.
Since, to true style, you can't get hit.
But the true stylers are a special bunch.
I don't have that many hours in my life.
But the whole thing with the AI including in some cases enemies that seem to have X-ray vision because they can still spot me when I'm in cover. Sometimes when you're trying to sprint, the game registers that as you trying to go back into cover. Or you get stuck in animation hell where it's trying to do a turnaround when you're trying to get the hell out of a spot. And the thing coming straight from my nightmares of playing World at War on Veteran, way too many fucking grenades.
Grenades. Truly. Man's greatest creation.
Zan, you recall World at War on Veteran, where every 3 seconds somebody's throwing frags.
Mm-hmm. But it's never the people on your side.
No, you end up running away from a frag only to walk into another frag.
You have to run in the exact right direction.
Have I mentioned how much I hate moon logic in game design? It's not like I've been treating King's Quest as my whipping boy for over 20 years.
For those of you who don't get it, moon logic is logic that would only make sense if you lived on the moon, and thus is alien to everyone else.
Mm-hmm. We also call this handbraking or guide damn it.
God damn it is my favorite.
But you have that and because I would now on paper I would like the idea that you are far more limited in your resources, especially if you want to do no death runs. Though for whatever reason the enemies react to getting hit with a tranq the way they would react getting hit with a pistol, even though it's non-lethal.
Boy.
Is that kind of like how Batman's tactics are technically non-lethal?
Well,
Yeah.
I'll play devil's advocate here for a second, Monk. Enemies reacting as if they've been hit by a projectile, regardless of whether it is a tranquilizer dart or a bullet, in the same fashion, makes sense from a realism standpoint.
Mm-hmm. But when it comes to one of the other big problems is again all those explosions and hyper aggressive, hyper aware enemies, and you're more squishy, and you're very limited in your resources, as opposed to normal when money is flowing like water, so you can get all the ammo you need.
Hard mode was bullshit.
Mm-hmm. And that's why, truth be, I would normally say just play it on normal, but actually I think the best way to experience Alpha Protocol is playing it on easy, because you spend less time in combat and more time in where the game actually shines.
Yes.
Because
absolutely.
Now we've talked about dialogue wheels and the like, and we've brought up the Tor effect in the past.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that very few games have done since that makes Alpha Protocol stand out is the fact that conversation between yourself and NPCs is not what some people call an interrogation. It's not you exhausting every single option, because you can't. You're on a timer, and the only way you get a do-over is by resetting.
Mm-hmm.
And even that doesn't save you because of all the little details that the game is keeping in mind.
You'd have to have a save and just reload from save.
Mm-hmm. But even with that, there's plenty of little details that NPCs will react to based on say your equipment or your relationship with other people, or even the order in which you do certain missions.
Yeah.
And that is something that I definitely appreciate. Though because of the amount of moving parts, it does result in you getting lost if you decide to take a few weeks off from the game. And when you're doing this kind of thing, it greatly benefits from having a web of connections, which Game Deck, which released last year, actually does that. And I think it's especially given the importance of dossiers,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's something that's all the more important. The game does have a codex, but it doesn't have a web of connections.
Yeah.
And from what I had recalled, if they had managed to get the sequel off the ground, they actually were planning on doing that.
But they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Which is rather unfortunate. I would have loved to see a sequel where a lot of the things players had issues with, and even things Obsidian had issues with, were tweaked and resolved.
Mm-hmm. And especially a lot of games around this time were introducing the concept of factions. But
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this is one case where those amount of factions actually made sense.
Yeah.
Because it's not because yes, everybody has their own secrets, but everybody is affiliated with some other group. The only person who is a true wild card in all of these moving parts is the protagonist, Michael Thornton.
The only wild card is the player character.
I mean, you have G22, you have Al Samad, you have the Veteran Combat Initiative, you had the White Oak Triads, and you have the CIA in some form or another, as well as Halbeck. The only one that can be truly be considered the bad guy, quote unquote, is Halbeck.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone else is shades of gray, which there's multiple issues that can sprout from that. One of them is the fact that when everybody's a shade of gray, there's the problem of trying to write it, because a lot of the better parts in the story you're only going to be able to get glimpses of.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say the and if you look at the stories that these kind of games are, the stories that these kind of games are trying to emulate, there's a very clear indication of who's the face and who's the heel. So I honestly think that while doing the everyone but Halbeck has some shades of gray is certainly in keeping with the your choices matter narrative at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I think it may have been better to have a standard hero and a standard villain overall.
Especially considering that one of their inspirations is James Bond, and commonly in James Bond, the good guy is MI6 and the CIA.
Mm-hmm. And well, usually you have singular villains, or back in the day you had bigger organizations like Spectre.
Mm-hmm. Which was still run by the ultimate villain Blofeld.
Mm-hmm. But, and I'm not saying have everything be tied to one particular organization. I don't want a Moriarty problem.
Oh.
But let's consider the fact that throughout most of the game, the Halbeck Corporation is mentioned as manipulating things, but you don't have much direct confrontation with Halbeck until the end. Most of your conflicts are with several of the other factions.
Mm-hmm.
And let's contrast this with, say, Knights of the Old Republic. You have one primary antagonist throughout, and that antagonist does get in your way at various points in that story.
Mm-hmm.
Probably because he's overcompensating for that metal plate on his face, like he's General Overbite. In fact, going back and playing KOTOR, I ended up making that joke.
About Darth Malik?
Yeah.
I can see why. But you want to know what joke I would make?
What?
Why did he take his jaw from the Iron Giant? Regardless, yeah, having the mastermind actually do, mastermind things makes for a more compelling villain.
And let's also look at Mass Effect. For the even though you have plenty of antagonists, Saren is the one you're chasing after for most of it, and then at the end he ends up getting switched over with Sovereign.
Yep, and that's when you learn about the Reapers and their issue. But then in the second game, you get the elusive man. And that's I elusive, not E elusive.
Yeah.
But
But even with 2, the big one that's moving against you the most is the collectors.
the collectors, and they are the pawns of Harbinger.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 3, you have Deuter antagonists. You have Harbinger and the Fleet of Reapers, and you have the elusive man in Cerberus. And you get a big damn confrontation with the elusive man for sure.
Yeah. The point is that even if they're a villain in the shadows, they are still moving against you.
Mm-hmm.
And you would think the fact that you didn't die during your mission in Saudi Arabia would be enough for them to try and get rid of you discreetly.
You mean in Alpha Protocol?
Yeah.
That's true.
The point is that by trying to have this wide approach, it's far more difficult to still do that while having the same kind of compelling story. And even Obsidian's previous works have a better understanding of this need for a proper villain. It's just that in that situation you had multiple factions that you could get on either side with, and each one was dependent on that platinum chip that you had stolen.
Yep.
But it's not like the person you deliver it to was any kind of good guy.
I think the biggest thing I liked about New Vegas was there wasn't really a good guy.
Mm-hmm. I get that they were trying to do something like that with Alpha Protocol, but I think the reason it doesn't work is that the mystery that's supposed to propel you forward isn't as strong.
Not only that, but in spy fiction, the spy is working for someone.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not made out in the very beginning that the spy is working for the bad guy, and so you're following an antagonist, then it is supposed to be assumed that the spy is ostensibly working for the good guys, whoever they might be.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have a distinct good guy, they need a distinct villain.
So I do think that a way to probably have Halbeck be more active is sending assassins right in the middle of some of your operations. Like say you're doing one of the jobs in Moscow, and then all of a sudden some other party shows up to try and kill you.
Mm-hmm. And they're decked out in at the same level as you are, maybe a little higher.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that's the ideal way to do it, but it is a way.
Mm-hmm. And of course, there are little details you can pepper in there to cement it, but that's details, and we're dealing with the bigger picture.
Yeah. But and even that approach lends itself far more to the idea of a whodunit mystery.
Yeah.
But the problem is the fact that Halbeck is not directly involved with a lot of the story, ends up creating an issue. And of course we mentioned how there's 3 archetypes. The dialogue, if you're trying to do the James Bond-like archetype, is weird. I don't know if this was the direction or the writing or somebody not paying too much attention, but it's trying too hard.
let's be honest, Monk. James Bond's dialogue only really works in the version of the world that is James Bond's. You can't pull it off in the normal world.
And that goes right back into what I said, where they had to pick a spot on the spectrum and stick to it.
Mm-hmm.
But even with that, I do like the fact that you have the one, as I mentioned before, you have those dialogue options, especially if you decide to start the game as a veteran or a recruit instead of one of the base 3 classes. And if you've read dossiers, those open a whole lot more angles.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually this I'd say Alpha Protocol's narrative has a bigger emphasis on width than height.
Yeah, it's wider than it is deep.
And I think that's the reason why those dialogue options have helped it maintain the position that it has, even with the problems that we've talked about.
And there are various ways to fix those problems. I detailed a couple, and you have as well.
Yeah.
In the end, we'll never see an actual fixed Alpha Protocol, which makes me a little sad, but it's understandable.
Now, in the aftermath, there have been some spy fiction, quote unquote RPGs, but they've always been in the tactics RPG approach, whether it be things like Invisible Ink or Phantom Doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that the idea of a spy fiction role playing game is possible, but it requires a different approach when it comes to the role playing game aspect.
Yeah, you absolutely have to make sure that you know what world you're aiming for and stick to it.
And truth be told, if someone asked me to design a spy fiction RPG where you're going to have multiple angles like that, the approach that I'd honestly take has a far bigger instead of having an emphasis on powers, it would have an emphasis on loadouts. Because if you look at the gameplay loop in Alpha Protocol, it is very mission-based.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly not suggesting doing some open world shit with this kind of thing. I'm already kind of sick of open worlds as it is. Which is why we did that whole thinking outside the Ubi box episode.
Yeah.
But the reason why I think focusing on loadouts is the best approach is by doing that, you end up eliminating a lot of problems. So essentially, if you were to do this hypothetical, when you're leveling up one of those 3 pillars that I mentioned, it's not changing a power set that you have. What it's changing is what you can bring into a fight. You level up the combat end of things. You can bring along a bigger variety of guns with a bigger variety of attachments, maybe even specialized ammunition.
Yeah, which is essentially what Mass Effect did with the way it did its skills concerning things.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't have these items on cooldown. I'd have it that you have a certain number of charges,
like real ammunition.
Mm-hmm.
Which makes sense.
Whether it be ammunition, whether it be combat stims, and I'm not saying a combat stim to let you go into berserk mode, but something like, say, diazepam or pentasmin in Metal Gear Solid. You know, the drug that you took, so you're
benzos. they're benzos to make your hands stop shaking.
Mm-hmm. Because the idea, I think the idea of a combat stim that some sort of heartbeat or a narrower vision, I think would be a far better is a far better signpost than changing colors.
True. Very true.
And of course, these things like Intel, it would be being allowing you to get drops and the like. That I have no problem with that, and that can be kept. I'd even keep the concept of multiplayer false intel that they were considering. The idea that people can submit intel into a multiplayer shop, but depending on the players, some of the intel is legit and some isn't. Basically, another step of the bloodstain message that the Souls games have used.
Try finger, butthole.
I probably wouldn't have it that they type out the message, but probably use that same dialogue wheel where there's three legit tips that they can give and one false one.
That could work.
I will freely admit that if somebody were asking me to design that hypothetical, I would lean far more into the James Bond end of things than I would the than I would the Jason Bourne end. And there's two reasons. But truth be told, the things that I would be more likely to lean into would be stuff like Kingsman and in a certain roundabout way, the world that John Wick takes place in.
You mean where people do nearly superhuman things?
Where there is this hidden world of near superhumans that operate under specific rules.
Manners maketh man.
Especially with things like the Continental Hotel in John Wick and the coins.
Not just the coins, but the fact that each Continental is technically a holy ground that nobody can fight in. They've got Highlander rules going on.
Mm-hmm.
And you can be excommunicated. And you can even... The fact that an actual hotel can be desecrated and removed from a list of active hotels, that was an interesting little bit.
But also the marker. This blood pact that if it's called upon, you have to answer it.
Yep.
I will admit a lot of those things kind of lean into the factionalization setup that we've seen for years with World of Darkness. But if you're gonna steal from the best.
And I'm sure Mark would be very flattered.
I'm not saying directly steal from the idea that you have these supernatural beings within the real world, but more the idea that there is this hidden world that people don't see, which is very much in keeping with the spy thing.
Yes.
And an organization like Alpha Protocol, a semi-autonomous investigation group that has very little oversight from the government, is the perfect place where they might have experimental treatments to enhance their operatives.
Mm-hmm.
Which the idea of treatments the idea of an enhanced operative is something we see a lot in spy fiction. And hell, we saw it plenty in the Imperial Agent storyline in the Old Republic.
Mm-hmm.
Which, in my personal opinion, was one of the it's kind of funny that all of the best storylines in the Old Republic were all on the Imperial side. It's like what was one of the writers Aaron Dembski Bowden? I'm not saying all of them were, but it is kind of amusing how that turns out. But because of that setup, I think relying on loadouts would actually encourage replays. Much in the
It
same,
would.
much in the same way that if you look at something like Tenchu or Thief, you have many options to get to the destination. It's a matter of what you're bringing to the table to actually help you achieve that.
Yeah.
And I know it's tempting to discourage combat, but if combat's going to be one of the pillars, you can't really do that, and that also means you can't have infinitely spawning enemies.
True.
Oh, but even the stuff with emails, I think that kind of thing can be kept, as well as, and I'd probably implement something where emails can culminate in a I'd like to meet you at this destination, which could be a legit meeting, or it could be an ambush.
Could
And
be legit, or you could be getting shot in the face.
hmm and it's a case of what are you going to bring? Because if you go into that with combat gear, you're going to be less likely to get shot in the face.
But you're going to be more likely to have everybody belligerent with you.
hmm Um, it's kind of like how you could have three different dialogue openings the first time you meet Omen Dang.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the aftermath, when it came to the aftermath of Alpha Protocol, and I will admit that whole loadout thing, I was sort of ripping that from Spycraft 2.0, which also came out around this time.
How about that shit?
hmm And well, Spycraft did D20 Modern better than D20 Modern.
We've been over stuff like that before, though.
But that had a kind of requisition system that was in slots. It's a lot more complicated than what I was going with, because it's a tabletop role playing game and not a video game. But the point still stands.
Yes.
And sorry, carbonation. And in keeping with that, I do think a lot of people at Obsidian look at Alpha Protocol as a harsh lesson in
Yeah.
in actually having a direction. Not just a idea, because as much as you had said that the set piece was an idea, it's not a very strong one in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. It was probably a central idea, and they needed to expand on it,
hmm
for sure.
And this is also why whenever I've had a few people approach me about advice on how to turn X or Y into tabletop, or for me to give my thoughts on a TTRPG project that they're working on. And one thing that I keep telling a lot of people is that you need to figure out a direction first before you start, because so many people start with what sort of mechanics they want to do. Pro tip, folks, don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
When you do that, you end up creating a problem. That problem being, if you're focused on the mechanics, you don't have a spot to give them room to identify themselves in. and when you don't have that, then you don't have as strong of a direction as you think.
Mm-hmm.
And would it surprise you at all if I say that I've seen this problem a lot with people trying to make Toku RPGs?
No.
I'd also saw it with somebody wanting to make a Ghost in the Shell RPG, and I just told him, just rip off Cyberpunk. Half the job's done.
There you go.
Job's a good one.
Or, well, nowadays, if somebody wants to say this with Blade Runner, I can point them to the Free League game that's going to come out later. But even though that particular mindset is applicable to TTRPGs, it's just as applicable to video games in terms of needing to have a specific direction. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the work that Obsidian has done after this definitely shows that.
Of course, Obsidian has had time to, refine their abilities. And some things that came after Alpha Protocol. I mean, New Vegas released the same year, as I already discussed, but they helped with things like Pillars of Eternity, South Park: The Stick of Truth.
Oh yes.
Incidentally, in the aftermath of Alpha Protocol, they were able to make their own game engine, which one of the first games that it was used for was the Stick of Truth.
Mm-hmm. And they've been doing a lot of stuff with Paradox, actually, because they also did Paradox's Tyranny, and obviously Pillars of Eternity too. But then they did their own thing, The Outer Worlds, which, like it or hate it, it was really well made.
I've seen some people say that it isn't. That some people try and compare it to the original Fallout or even Fallout 2, which I don't think it's fair to compare it to any of the Fallouts.
It's not trying to be Fallout. It
anything,
just because it's a first-person or third-person game with some elements like it, it's not trying to be Fallout.
If anything, I'd say it's trying to be a somewhat saner Oddworld.
Can you really have a saner Oddworld?
Again, it's on a spectrum.
They also made that slightly weird survival game, Grounded. Not my style of game, but I can see why people would like it. And then Pentiment, which is coming out November of this year, is a 16th role-playing game taking place in 16th century Bavaria. But it's a whodunit almost.
Yeah. So even if they've moved on, I think some aspects of the type of storytelling they want to do with Alpha Protocol have stuck in their head the same way the Dune RPG, not Dune RPG, but the Dune film that didn't get made stuck in the heads of a lot of the people who were involved with it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So let me, because yeah, there was Grounded. There's apparently Pentiment, which Avowed, which Pentiment I only know a little bit of. That's the Bavaria one you mentioned.
Yep, it's going to be a whodunit. That spans over 25 years of someone's life in game. That's about all we really know. And then, of course, The Outer Worlds 2, which makes sense considering how good The Outer Worlds 1 was.
Uh, I will admit that the one project from Obsidian I'd be interested to see what it would have become was Stormlands.
Yeah, that would have been interesting.
But I'd say we've certainly exhausted this particular topic. But there is one angle that actually no that's there's not enough meat on that particular bone. I was gonna bring up the whether or not a team based spy game can be done.
Yeah, I don't.
That would be more of a discussion of how to do a spy fiction campaign when you have multiple players at a table.
Yeah, or rather than a team-based spy game. What was that game that we saw during the Hangover bullshit shit show?
Oh right. Let me grab the playlist.
You know which one I'm talking about. The one where it's a bunch of absolutely 70s spy fiction type people all fighting for the same thing.
Let's see. Hang on, I'm trying to find because of the sheer amount of yeah, Deceive Inc.
Yeah, there we go.
Where everybody's vying to get the briefcase and get out, but you can't trust anybody in the environment because it could be somebody disguising themselves as an NPC or even a prop. And
yeah, you can't trust the environment.
Those of you who played Prop Hunt should know the struggle.
Prop Hunt. Don't you love Prop Hunt when you're turned into a giant trestle? Fuck you, Prop Hunt, for turning me into a trestle the size of a 3-story building. You know how hard it was to hide? And I still won?
How?
Because there was one building that didn't have a trestle, and nobody noticed. And so I became the trestle on that building.
That sounds like the equivalent of Luigi wins by doing nothing.
No, Monk, because I had to position myself pretty much pixel perfect compared to all the other trestles. Because otherwise people walking up and down me would have noticed.
But that is going to do it for this particular episode of GeekWatch. This was a shorter one, but it's one that I wanted to get out of my system so I didn't have to worry about it being stuck in the backlog taunting me.
Yep.
Now, I don't have much in the way of interviews this week, so things are going to be a bit lighter until I get back on the grind. Largely because Kickstarter chose this of all months to do zine quests, and the problem with zine-like games is there's not a lot of meat on the bones to do my usual interview style.
Yep.
So there's a lot of stuff that's interesting, but is not really stuff that I can cover. The only one that's the exception is the Era prototype games, and that's because of the rapport that I have with Ed. But I will note that the next episode of The Valley of the Judged will be on Wednesday instead of Friday.
Because Friday's his birthday, people. I know we've been saying it repeatedly, but he's not going to work on Friday. And so we're going to just do the next Emberwind Valley on Wednesday. It fits our schedules, and it makes sure that we keep the ball rolling.
Yeah. So, as Yoshi P would say, please look forward to it, especially since we get to cover the Skill Monkey class on Wednesday.
Skill Monkey class that doesn't exist as a Skill Monkey!
It's usually a Skill Monkey, not the case here.
Exactly. Good.
But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra, I am your gaming monk, and